You want me to put that on my Tudor?
This one's wife. Why she went after William. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. This one's wife is a narcissist. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, is a normal. He is the brother of the intimate partner primary source, Prince Harry. As a consequence of the needs of her narcissism, she ended up ensnaring Prince Harry. This was done because he was easy to ensnare, principally as a consequence of susceptibility to her being a narcissist because of his own addiction, which she was then able to exploit through lashings of spicy poontang. Also, false compassion with regard to his vulnerabilities, and making use of the fact that he was the spare to suggest that actually he'd received something of a raw deal from his family members, and that she was there to look out for his interests in the way that nobody else had. Thus has been felt somewhat special, and thought that he'd met his soulmate, his saviour, and he became ensnared. As part of the dynamic which always takes place, he was given lots of the good stuff initially, as he was brought under control. Her narcissism identified that he was somebody that would fountain with fuel the lifeblood of the narcissist, and that there were considerable character traits and residual benefits that would be obtained from him. Thus, he became a prime target, and for a woman that was a mediocre actress that had come from an okay background, the opportunity to be shot into the stratosphere of world recognition by marrying into the most famous royal family in the world, with all of the assorted advantages that came with that, proved far too tempting. Her narcissism went after it like seeing food when someone had not eaten for 2 weeks. Her narcissism caused her to see Harry as this handsome, eloquent, wonderful, warm man that needed rescuing from his awful family. It caused her to see him as an injured individual who had suffered, and that she was there to make the boo-boo go away and make everything better. And thus her narcissism painted him white, compelling her to see him in such a favourable light. And having commenced the golden period through the seduction, then sought to embed him. And that was done as a consequence of becoming married. They met somewhere around about autumn 2016. The wedding took place in May 2018, less than 2 years later. That is fairly quick to go from meeting someone to becoming married to them. And as you all know, it was William who pointed out that things were moving with unnatural haste, not that Ginger Bollocks was able to listen, because he was too caught up with his own emotional thinking and the manipulations. At that juncture, of course, all had been going well for Prince Harry. He was still in the golden period. He was getting lashings of spicy poontang. She was being supportive. She was sort of fitting in with the royal family, but not completely. And then, not long after they were married, because at that juncture they were getting on to about 18 months of the golden period, which is ordinarily getting towards the outer limit of it, that the lustre of Harry will have become less so, and he entered sustained devaluation at a later point in 2018. This also meant that fresh targets presented themselves to this one's wife, and one of those would be William. You might think to yourself, well, hang on a second. You're married to Harry, William's married to Catherine. This is a complete no-go. But remember, this one's wife is a narcissist, and therefore she doesn't recognise the boundary of her own marriage or the fact that William is with somebody else. She operates with a daily mindset that all women want to be like her because she's such a caring, empathic, fashion icon, and that all men want to knock her hip out because she's so desirable. Her narcissism will have portrayed to her that Harry was a bit useless now, and that William was the main deal. Because she would have then realised, and not being particularly bright, that actually she wasn't going to be queen. She wasn't going to get that with Harry, unless, of course, there was that plane crash that she purportedly spoke about. Instead, Catherine was going to be queen because William was going to be king, because he was an immediate heir. This meant that this one's wife's narcissism decided, actually, William is a much better prospect now. He's better looking than Harry. And whether you agree with that or not, her narcissism will have persuaded her that that's the fact. That he's funnier than Harry, that he's more interesting than Harry. Why? Because the narcissism will have convinced her of those things so that she would look upon William as a prospective intimate partner primary source, because it was viewed that he could be controlled, that he would provide plenty of fuel, and, particularly importantly, he would have superior character traits and residual benefits to those of Harry, who was now painted black. Furthermore, William would repeatedly keep coming up on her radar. They lived near one another. They were related. They were in-laws. And therefore, her narcissism would see him as a repeated possibility. And therefore, she will have attempted to seduce him. Now, I'm not saying that she cornered him in the back stairs and grabbed his nuts and said, "How about it, Big Willie Styley, give it to me, big boy." But rather, she'll have made eyes at William. Indeed, we've seen in some of the pictures the way that she looks at him, all doe-eyed. Now remember, previously, William would have been subjected to being painted white as a non-intimate secondary source, with her having no interest in him other than the fact that he was the brother-in-law and was viewed favourably. However, once Harry entered the sustained devaluation, William's status changed. He was viewed as a potential replacement for his brother, and that she started to look at him through the lens of intimacy. It doesn't suggest that any intimacy actually occurred. Indeed, William will have rebuffed it. As a normal, he has no addiction, and he's faithful to his wife. But the fact is, she, as a narcissist, would essentially have seen him as fair game, because the narcissist would have told her that he is. It wouldn't have her thinking, "Oh, I can't, because, I have to be faithful to Harry. Harry's in sustained devaluation, so the idea of fidelity goes out of the window." It doesn't have her thinking, "Oh, hang on a second, I can't interfere in the relationship between William and Catherine." Her narcissism simply doesn't give a rat's ass about that. Instead, it wants to propel her to pursue him, because he's such a tasty target, particularly with the fact that she would be elevated in the line of succession. Her narcissism wanted that to occur. Thus, with Harry in sustained devaluation, William becomes a more attractive target, and undoubtedly she will, because she's a narcissist, have gone after him. I don't think at all that any intimacy actually occurred, although she would want it to have taken place, because William would have sensed that something wasn't quite right about her. Back then, he didn't know that she was a narcissist until expertly advised about it more recently. However, he would have seen she moved with undue haste with regard to my brother, the way that she'd spoken to certain people, the way that she dealt with Catherine, of course, in and around the wedding, and the issues about the tights on the children and so forth was problematic. And therefore, in the circumstances, he will have got the measure that there was something that wasn't appropriate or right in relation to this one's wife. William isn't affected by emotional thinking, so unlike somebody else who might have been taken in, which could have caused him to have been unfaithful to his wife, because empathic individuals can be dirty empaths as a consequence of that infidelity streak, which in effect becomes enhanced by the presence of a narcissist. William was unaffected by this. He has no addiction to the narcissist, and indeed can see far more clearly the poor behaviours of this one's wife, not necessarily knowing that she's a narcissist, but seeing those behaviours and disapproving of them, and thus keeping his distance. We all saw, of course, how he behaved in relation to his scarf. He recognised early on that there was something wasn't quite right about her and kept his distance. But that wouldn't have stopped this one's wife. Although him keeping a distance from her would have wounded her, the effect of that wounding passes over time, and there would be other instances where there would be Hoover triggers which were activated, and she would have sought to Hoover him. She didn't embark on a concerted campaign to have some "How's your father?" with William, but there's little doubt that her narcissism would have caused her to at least make some attempt to become closer to him, but ultimately recognised that this was on a hiding to nothing, because as time went on, William ensured that he distanced himself more and more from her, resulting in more frequent and sustained wounding, so that her narcissism eventually recognised there's nothing to be had with him, leave it. And thus she did. But her narcissism, with its sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, absence of emotional empathy, the fact that Harry was in a sustained devaluation, will have driven her to pursue William, and thus she would have been flirtatious around him, that she would have batted her eyelashes at him, that she'd have been all touchy-touchy around him, that she would have been complimentary about him. William didn't fall for it, because, one, he doesn't have the addiction, and two, he was able to see at an early juncture many of her behaviours for what they were, unpleasant and problematic, and three, he remains faithful to his wife. Thus, he did not succumb to the seductive wiles of this one's wife, and eventually she was forced to move on. But she went after William because her narcissism dictated that she should do so, because Harry was in sustained devaluation and William presented a very attractive target. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.